Once you get your racks out, compare all the components. Make sure each end is sticking out the same distance with the rack completely lined up, so that you know that the rack is straight ahead or not. And you can use a tape measure and measure from the bands out to the end on each side. I'm going to take this stub shaft off and put a mark on this. Another 12mm bolt. I'm match marking the bottom of this before it shoots off of there. From really, it was kind of gold on there. I had to beat it, and I don't want it shooting off without being marked. So I put a marking line with the clamp slot there. Both racks are straight ahead. There really wasn't any discerning marks on the splines other than the mark I put on. I just want to transfer the shaft from one to the other. It does look like my mark's lining up with a divot on this right off to the side of this return port. So I'm going to put my gap right on that divot and knock it down on there, put the pinch bolt on it. I'm going to be putting the lower pinch bolt back in. I clean the threads. I'm going to be putting just a dab of red Loctite on the threads, and both this lower bolt and the upper bolt to the steering column shaft torqued to 21 foot-pounds. I went ahead and placed a mark on the shaft where I know that the rack's straight ahead, that I can see out the driver's side when I put it in there. I just have to line this other mark up, clamp on the shaft. If you really wanted to absolutely verify the rack center, you can rotate this shaft all the way one direction and then count the turns all the way back to the stop on the other direction, and then rotate it back half of that total number. Just put a mark on it so you'll know where you started at. I washed the oil laying in this boot out so that it wouldn't swell the rubber up, hopefully. I'm going to pour about a half quart of fresh Dexron 3 transmission fluid into the reservoir to flush out the lines. This pump wasn't putting out any metal, or the rack wasn't putting out any metal, but regular power steering fluid was used in it, so I need to kind of help get that out of there. It'll help out any residual debris in the system too. And the fluid will just drain out the return line. But they've drained for several hours. I think it's pretty clean. I'm just going to get some of the power steering fluid out of it. Now, while I got all this room underneath here, I'm going to go ahead and change these two O-rings on the supply and return line. Came with the rack. Be sure you got them oiled up with some fresh transmission fluid. They went right on there. Well, it's about time to stick the new rack in. I'm going to stick some black tape on the end of the threads from the inner tie rod in, both sides, and loosen these caps up. Have a look in there and then just slightly put them back into place. Lids are taped up. Let's see. Keep the dirt out of these. That looks good. Looks good. Sure there's no surprises in there waiting. Especially on the pressure side. I used to put little pressure valves that fold out in there. At least them you was done. Looks good. The rubber grommet's been transferred. The flat part will face down. You can kind of glue that in place if you really need to, or tack it in place. Don't make it permanent. Use some weather strip adhesive, just as a little dot or two. Pinch bolts tighten down. Bushings are in it. Take your tie rod and stay nuts off and transfer them to the new rack. So it's ready to go back in there. That bolt there was really galled into the bushing. I clamped it down with some hawkbill nosed vice grips and used an impact on it. It's really well stuck. It's not ate up too bad, so I can use it. Went ahead and laid all 4 bolts in the rack. I'm going to tighten the driver's side down first, and then the passenger side clamp with bushing. These bolts torque to 54 foot-pounds. All 4 of them. The engine mount tightens to 54 foot-pounds as well, and that's for it when the frame goes back up. Once you get your rack bolts tightened down, go ahead and put the 12mm bolt back in the heat shield. That goes inside that noise suppressor block of steel there. This rubber mount has a flat area with a rib running to it, and the frame has an accommodation for that rib, so that's how it goes. Okay, it's time to ease the frame back up. I'm going to have to keep track of this ball joint on the driver's side, its position in relationship to the spindle. The engine mount bolts need to be lined up to go through the frame, and get a good look at your marks you put on your shaft. Make sure they're still lined up. You'll have to go up and slip the steering shaft onto this intermediate shaft, and there's a yellow mark on the back side of it. And just got to keep track of those things. Keep these holes relatively in line with the frame bolt holes, so you don't pull the drive axle out. I actually just took the weight off the jack stands with a floor jack in the center of the frame. I picked this frame up and put it in a ball joint, and I'm going to stick the nut on it just so it'll stay put. I'm going to watch the engine mount bolts passing through the frame, get them started, and watch for the stub shaft to start coming up through the floor. Looks like the best place for a jack is in front of the driver's side control arm. Once you start raising the frame up, be sure you've got your dust boot on your rack. The floor hole cover covers a stub shaft. Check your marks on your rack again, make sure they're aligned. And, go ahead and start easing the frame up. I got the frame up enough to get the front bolts just threaded in a few turns. I'll go ahead and letting the back hang down just a little bit and stick these lines in their respectable places. Keeping them off of any dirt whatsoever. it'll roll in it to stay. Just turn them in there now. I'm using a stubby wrench to do it. That'll get you in there. As the lines are installed, it kind of helped to push over a little bit on this pressure fitting. It started and then got a little hard. If you can't turn it by hand the first few turns, you need to back it up. You don't want to cross thread them or you'll roll in the rack. Now all I've got to do is slide this clamp back on this return line nipple and put this 10mm bolt back in this hanger bracket. And put the frame bolts, tighten them down. If you can, try and put your frame back where the original stains where it was mounted at. Help keep it in line as much as possible. Bolt head leaves marked, and then right there on the body where that strut comes up, the pipe comes off the subframe up to the wheel well. And push it all the way back and side to side if it needs it. It's got a good definition there, side and the end of it. Use this hole on the back of the frame to pry the frame around just at where you need it. These rear bolts on this cradle torque to 82 foot-pounds, the big ones, 3/4 inch or 19mm. The front subframe bolts tighten to 54 foot-pounds. The engine mount studs, the nuts on it torque to 54 foot-pounds. These reinforcement bolts tighten to 35 foot-pounds, both sides. Lower ball joint nut on the driver's side tightens down to 72 foot-pounds. Feel free to put any Dexron 3 transmission fluid in the reservoir while you're putting the rest of this together. I've got the braces back on, and all the bolts and nuts are tightened to specs. Be sure and reinsert your clip back in to make sure the nut doesn't back off. I'm going to go ahead and attach the steering linkage to this intermediate shaft. It should be pointed straight ahead, and I'll just slip this splined handle in there, rotate it around, look at my mark, and see if I'm in the ballpark. Should be close to the original mark. Oh, that's nice. Shouldn't have any problems. It lines right up. Go ahead and put this pinch bolt in, put a little red Loctite on the end of it, tighten it down to 21 foot-pounds. Go ahead and pull this grommet up through here. Hooks in the back and snaps in the front. Go ahead and install your tie rod ends, noting the number of turns you had wrote down previously. Okay, it's got a bite. 12, 13, 14. This stay nut tightens to 54 foot-pounds, and this tie rod end nut tightens to 36 foot-pounds. The stud starts turning on you, you can put a jack underneath the tie rod end and put some the car weight on it, and that'll stop the stud from rotating. Do the other side the same way. Keep an eye on your alignment hole. Once you get to about 30 pounds, track it real close and snug it down to at least 36 foot-pounds. If you go past your hole, you need to take the tie rod in and loose and redo it. Never loosen the nut up to put the pin in. Always go forward. If it goes over 38 pounds or something, it's not going to bother at all. I'm at 30 pounds now and it's almost lined up. Before I tighten the stay nut down on the tie rod ends, stick your head in here and kind of look at the rotor and with the wheel well. Make sure it's reasonably straight in here. And the strut is straight at you. You have to use a pair of needle nose to open that clamp up on that rubber boot, and then you can turn the inner tie rod in or out to adjust the toe in and toe out where the rotor's wheels pointing out or in. Just release that boot clamp. Just hold it open while you're using a 13mm or whatever size your rack has, and turn this shaft in the tie rod. And once it looks pretty good, tighten the stay nut down. Now it's time to start it up and check it for leaks. Make sure your reservoir is at least 3/4 full. Yeah, it's pretty full. Well, give it a little starting up, see how it does. So far, so good. Be sure you use a clean funnel, clean fluid, and no lint on any rags you're wiping the stick off with. This little thing only holds just a little bit of fluid, so just a splash at a time is all you need to check it with. It really wouldn't take much to refill it. That's got it up in the add area. Once it gets hot, it'll check it after all the air's out of it. Well, turn it stop to stop. No airbag light, so must be centered up good enough. The stereo's working. If the clock spring's broke, chances are that stuff would quit working. Should be in business. Put the wheels back on it. The lug nuts torqued to 76 foot-pounds. Deadhead it from stop to stop a few times. Maybe rev it up and check for any leaks from your fittings. I don't see any drips or any new stuff on the floor in business. Now it needs to put on an alignment machine and a front wheel alignment done to it. Absolutely critical.